Today's gospel directs our attention towards the blind beggar Bartimaeus. At one level, it's the story of Christ's response to Bartimaeus' persistence. Bartimaeus overcame the opposition of the crowd to insist on his right to be heard by Christ. He told Christ that he wanted to see again. And sure enough, Christ granted that desire and thus healed Bartimaeus. Yet, as important as this is, and it certainly teaches us a lot about how we should approach Christ and how we should engage with petitionary prayer, nevertheless, it's not all there is to learn from this passage. We can also learn from what Bartimaeus knew about Christ. The first sign that there's something more going on over and above the healing story is the use of Bartimaeus' name. There are plenty of miraculous healings in the Gospels, but not nearly so many instances of the beneficiaries of those miraculous healings being named. It's most unlikely that the naming of Bartimaeus was an accident on St. Mark's part, that his pen just slipped, so to speak. It's much more likely that St. Mark uses this naming device to illustrate that he wants us to learn something from Bartimaeus, a point which is reinforced once we notice the location of this passage in St. Mark's Gospel. It immediately precedes Christ's triumphant entry into Jerusalem. So it's as if St. Mark is telling us this is what a blind beggar on the road to Jericho was able to discover about Christ just before his entry into Jerusalem. But what did Bartimaeus learn about Christ? Well, first, that he was the son of David. This locates Christ within the royal house of David, through which the Messiah was expected to come. It also linked Christ to the healing power of Solomon, David's son. So Bartimaeus was recognizing Christ both as Messiah and as healer. From where could Bartimaeus have acquired such knowledge about Christ, though? He couldn't see, so he couldn't have followed Christ around Israel and Judah and learned from that experience. He was just stuck on the side of the road to Jericho. On the other hand, if we consider a little further, that Christ was son of David wasn't something one could learn just through seeing, at least not directly with one's eyes. On the contrary, figuring out that Christ was son of David depends upon more than what one sees. The gospel points us towards the solution. Bartimaeus starts to call Jesus the son of David when he hears that Jesus has come. Bartimaeus may not be able to see, but he can hear, and we can suppose he has been sitting on the side of the road to Jericho, hearing things about Jesus of Nazareth, figuring out what that means, so that when the moment is right and he encounters Christ, he can seize that opportunity and can call Christ the Son of David. What else has Bartimaeus learned about Christ? Well, that he is a teacher. If the translation in the gospel today had been different, it would have used Rabboni, which is a transliteration from Aramaic for a word for teacher. Rabbi does much the same, but is a transliteration from Hebrew. It might not seem particularly impressive that Bartimaeus has come to the conclusion that Christ is teacher. But when Bartimaeus calls Christ this, he is imitating the practice of Christ's disciples. It's not so much that others don't call Christ teacher, but rather that Christ's disciples are responsible for the great majority of such cases in the Gospels. So the point being made is not only has Bartimaeus come to realize that Jesus is the Son of God, of David, with all that that entails, but also by addressing Christ as teacher, Bartimaeus has come to possess a knowledge of Christ that is similar to that which Christ's disciples enjoy. And what happens next? Well, at the end of the passage, we see that Bartimaeus follows Christ along the road which we know is about to lead to Christ's entry into Jerusalem and the passion which would follow from that. Effectively, Bartimaeus' faith has been recognized, and the next stage of his life, full discipleship with Christ, has begun. But what can we learn from Bartimaeus? Well, surely it's about paying attention. There are lots of opportunities for us to get to know Christ. We shouldn't let ourselves be distracted from those opportunities. We need to make the most of them, just as Bartimaeus did. And indeed, if we want an example, we could do a lot worse than imitate Bartimaeus.